Well, welcome to the show, Jason. I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So, in life, change is a constant, but people still really struggle embracing it fully. How do you encourage people to embrace change for the opportunity of growth that it's actually presenting?
Well, I mean, look, it's not easy to shift your mindset, but I think a good place to start is by identifying why you are so uncomfortable with change in the first place. I found in my own life, but certainly in studying others and talking to people as they've experienced their big moments of change, that a big reason why we struggle with change is because we experience change as loss. Something new comes along and we immediately think, oh, well, this new thing is going to replace an old thing that I was familiar with. So that feels like loss. And then because we want to know what's going to come next, we extrapolate the loss. We start to say, well, because I'm going to lose this thing, I'm not going to lose that thing. Because I lost that thing, I'm going to lose that other thing. And suddenly it starts to feel like a tailspin. And so one of the things that we need to do is whenever we are experiencing some kind of change is we need to push ourselves to identify gain as well. It's much harder to see gain. Loss comes first, gain comes later. But if we can start to anticipate what that gain might be, look for it, try to extrapolate, try to plan for it, that's where we can really start to feel like we're in control and we have something that we can grow as well.
Mm-hmm. So how do you really make that mental shift from seeing the loss to seeing the gain? What's a low-hanging fruit there?
Well, a good place to start is to just ask yourself a couple simple questions. I mean, look, let me be really clear here that like if you're going through a really challenging time or transition, that simply asking a couple questions is not going to solve everything, right? Which is the reason I wrote a whole book. But as just a one place to start, I think a couple simple questions is a really nice place. And to give you an example of how this can be put to use, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So the year is 1906, and recorded music is a brand new thing, like a completely new technology. There's phonographs are entering people's homes for the first time, and this is radical because if you consider it from this moment. In 1906 is you'll see exactly, but the turn of the century is really what we're talking about. From this moment prior, for all of human history, the only way that you could listen to music is if a human being was playing an instrument in front of you. And then suddenly there was a machine that could do it. It was revolutionary. And this was very exciting for a lot of consumers. Their minds were blown. They didn't believe it was possible. But it was really scary for musicians because musicians saw themselves being replaced. They thought, that their livelihoods at that point depended entirely upon performing live for people. That's where they made their money. They would perform live and they would also sell sheet music if they were a composer. That was basically it. And now suddenly here was this machine that could perform without them. And so the leader of the resistance against this thing was called John Philip. His name was John Philip Sousa. He's a famous composer. We still know his work today. All the military marches. John Philip Sousa. So John Philip Sousa argued all these crazy arguments against recorded music. And one of the ones that he told was in 1906, which is the reason I bring up that year. He wrote this article in Appleton's magazine called Menace of Mechanical Music. And it went like this. He said that if recorded music enters the home, then it will replace all forms of live music. And because why would anybody perform live when they have a machine that could do it? And then because there would no longer be any live performances in the home, mothers would no longer sing to their children because again, why would they do that? And then because mothers are not singing to their children, the children who grow up to imitate the mothers will instead grow up to imitate the machines, and thus we will raise a generation of machine babies. That was his argument. Now, that's a crazy argument, right? But you can see what he's done. He has extrapolated the loss. He saw change. He experienced it as loss. He saw, well, now people aren't going to want to record or perform live. And then he extrapolated. He said, well, if they're not going to perform live here, they're not going to perform live there. They're not going to perform live there. So anyway, the reason I tell you that story is to say that when you are catching yourself in that moment, and there are versions of that we do ourselves, right? If you're at a job and there's a change to your job, the very first thing you think of is, oh no, I don't have access to the thing that I was comfortable with and good at. And oh no, if I don't have that, then maybe I'm not as useful to my team anymore. And then if I'm not as useful to my team anymore, then maybe I don't have a job here anymore. And if I don't have a job here, then maybe I actually am going to get, I'm going to get fired and I'm never going to get another job in this industry again. This is what we do. Let's ask ourselves some questions. Number one, what new thing are we doing? What new habit are we learning? let me break those actually. So like number one, what new thing are we doing? Well, in this case, John Philip Sousa could have said, well, the thing that we're doing that's new is people are now listening to music whenever they want. What habit? This is question number two. What habit or skill are we learning as a result? In this case, you could say, well, people are developing the habit of having more control over their music when they listen to it and who they listen to. Now, number three, most important question. How can that be put to good use? How can that be put to good use? Let's ask, seriously. Whenever you go through a moment of change, how can this be put to good use? I'm learning something new. We're doing something different. How can it be put to good use? If John Philip Sousa had asked that, he might have realized, well, I can now record myself, and then people can buy my music and listen to it whenever they want. I don't have to be in front of them, which means that I can reach a lot more people at the same time than I could when I was just performing live and the only people who could hear me who were the ones in front of me. John Philip Sousa really was protecting a system that was actually limiting his economic opportunity. He didn't realize that because he hadn't asked these basic questions to try to extrapolate the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great story. Thanks for going through that. It really brings to light, I think, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset mentality. And, I think everybody has probably a disposition to one or the other, but I think breaking those down into those three questions is a good way for people kind of stuck in that fixed mindset to maybe shift over into that growth mindset in a period of change, because you have to adapt. You have to figure out a way to move forward, or else you're just going to be totally stuck.
Yeah. A fixed mindset is really based upon fear of losing the thing that you already have. And what we should be learning over time as we go through these moments of change is that, in fact, the greatest things that are available to us are often the ones that we hadn't previously identified. And so giving yourself just a way to start to imagine what those things are and start to engage with those options can help prove to you that actually some of the best stuff is the stuff that you don't already have. And therefore, you don't have to think of things in a fixed way, because a fixed is just simply trying to cling on to what you have. It's funny. People talk a lot about fixed mindset, growth mindset. There's actually there's a parallel that's worth thinking about, which is when you have a fixed mindset about like an entire economy. Have you ever heard of the lump of labor fallacy? It's one of my favorites.
No, what's that?
So lump of labor fallacy is it's an economic sort of way of thinking. And anyway, the idea here is that the fallacy is that there's a fixed lump of labor in a marketplace. So that we have a certain number of people and a certain number of jobs. And if you switch either of those factors, then you create an imbalance. So this is why people worry that new technologies are going to permanently put people out of work, right? Because what you're doing is you're keeping a fixed number of people, and you think that you're just now reducing the number of jobs. This is also why, for example, not to get political, but why there is often opposition to immigration, because the idea is that you're adding people, but you have a fixed number of jobs, and therefore there's going to be an imbalance. But what we have learned across time is that that's never true, because there isn't a fixed lump of labor. There is, in fact, a completely flexible lump of labor. But there's a flexible amount of jobs, and there's a flexible amount of people. And if you create technology that reduces the number of if you invent a plow so that farmers don't have to do the work by hand, it's not like they're out of work. What they instead do is find other jobs, or they create new opportunities. They eventually create a kind of leisure class of activities that then people want to spend money on, which creates more jobs. This is what we always do. And so if you think, look, the economy is people fearing having a fixed mindset and it never comes true, it shouldn't be true for you either as an individual.
Mm-hmm. That makes a ton of sense. And, our audience is largely in the construction industry. And so they're experiencing right now this seismic shift as technology really comes into the industry, and the digital transformation is happening in construction. It's truly the next kind of industrialized revolution taking hold. Yeah. So based on your experiences, how can people really better spot the areas that will lead to the growth areas versus here's a new shiny object that's coming onto the scene?
Well, so I think that the way that you differentiate shiny object versus true growth is, it's pure evidence and data. And I think that the more in which you can take very seriously what people want and need and how that can be provided to them, what are the problems that need to be solved, and how can you solve them, or how can this new technology solve them? I think the closer you are to understanding what's going to be real value and where you might want to shift your resources. Like, look, it's when you look back across time, what you see is that some of the most powerful innovations that seemed like they were terrifying to the people of the time were really misunderstood, and were in fact great creators of new opportunity. And oftentimes the thing that was lacking was some particular way in which the value of this innovation could be communicated to people, or the way in which it could be brought to the world. Now, that was super abstract, so I'll give you an example. So, I'm trying to think. Let me tell you about elevators, and the reason I want to tell you about elevators is because elevators are a core part of any large-scale construction. And also because when automatic elevators were introduced in the 1940s, 1950s, mass introduced, they were really, really scary to people. People saw, well, first of all, the elevator operators saw them as putting them out of a job, right? Reasonably so. Mm-hmm. But also consumers saw it as technology that was scary for good reason. Imagine this. You do not, in any other circumstance except for an elevator, you do not walk into a closed space where you can't see outside of it, and there's no human operator, and it physically moves you. Nothing else like it. And so this was really scary to people. And what ultimately happened was the elevator industry was trying to figure out, well, what is it that people need to feel comfortable here? How do we solve people's problem? Right? The technology solves one problem, which is moving people up and down. But now we have another problem, which is that we've created an efficiency. We've added a new technology. We've altered the way in which this thing operates. And yet we don't, people aren't stepping into these things. They're really scared. What they needed to do was they needed to build a bridge of familiarity. What they needed to do was identify the thing that people felt most comfortable by, the thing that they wanted, the thing that made them happy, and then give it to them in a new way. People don't like new things. What they like are better versions of old things. And so the way that the elevator industry ultimately solved for this problem was that they said, well, why don't we put a soothing female voice in the elevator that says things like going up and going down and floor 1 and floor 2. And this is what ultimately got people to come into the elevator. Now, the reason why I tell you this story is not to just like tell you another wacky thing from history, but rather to show you that like when massive change comes to an industry, oftentimes it can feel completely crazy and overwhelming, but what you have to do is really drill down to the basics, which is how are we solving problems for people, and what do people want, and what do they need from us, and what's the best way in which to deliver that. And I think that when we're talking to people in the construction industry, there's a lot of change going on, obviously. And I think that it's very easy to focus on, well, there's this new technological shift, and therefore it is either going to make me obsolete, or it's going to completely shift the way in which I do my work, or it's going to shift the needs that people have. And I think that oftentimes that's a distraction. I think that what you really need to do is step back and say, what value can I provide to people? And is there a better way to provide that same value? Right? People's needs don't necessarily change. The reason why people got into the elevator with the soothing female voice is because what they ultimately wanted was a sense that there's a person in control, and you needed to give that to them in a new way. And for the construction industry, I'm sure there are all sorts of ways in which you understand exactly how you bring value to people and what your company brings value. And there are now going to be new tools and technologies that are going to enable that. And your question isn't, well, how do I razzle dazzle, or how do I use this new thing just because? The question is, what is the core value that people need from me? And then how can I make sure that I'm delivering that in a new way while being really, really crystal clear about the continued value that I provide?
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about there is something that we talk about a lot on this show, and that's the empathy for the end user. And no technology innovation is going to be successful unless you go to the end user and you sit down, you have that empathy with them, and you figure out their pain points and what their motivation is, and then you work around that instead of just kind of cramming something down. You got to start with the people that are actually going to be using it and implementing it, have empathy for them, and then work backwards from there when you're implementing
I think that's a really, really great way of thinking about it. You know, you have to start with where they are, and you have to also be mindful of where the gaps are that can make something seem like something seem like it's 0% successful, where in fact it's probably already 99% successful. And what you need to do is just like bridge that final little gap. You know, there's I was really fascinated to watch what happened with Lime. You know, Lime, the scooter company. Their cities are full of these mechanical scooters, and so
Right.
when Lime and Bird and all these scooters came out onto the city streets, people were like freaking out about them. You saw these newspaper articles about how cities are considering banning these things, and a lot of that was driven by concerns of safety, and so here you have this issue where there's a new technology that's been introduced in a mass way. It's altering consumer behavior. People are now using them to get around cities. Seems like it's possibly very unsafe, and so there's a lot of concern about that, and therefore people want to ban it, or they're railing against it. So Lime decided to look into the data very smartly to see, what are we actually talking about here? And what they found was that the vast, right, like 99+% rides were totally safe. That there was a small percentage of rides where there was some kind of accident. But most of those were, nobody was injured in any way. And there was a very tiny fraction, a fraction of a percent, in which people were seriously injured. And they looked at that and they said, well, okay, what was happening in those? And what they found was that the bulk of those serious injuries happened on someone's first 5 rides. Now, once you have that information, you look at this problem in a totally new way. Because now you understand that what you're dealing with isn't a technology problem. It's an education problem, right? Now you're able to reframe it. You see what your real problem is, and therefore how you can best deliver value to people. So if the problem is that people are having accidents in their first 5 rides, well, then you better just create some kind of educational program where people can have their first 5 rides in a controlled environment. Because once they get used to the thing, their chances of having an accident go down actually rather significantly. So that's what Lime does. They introduce all these programs nationwide in which people can come and learn how to ride in a parking lot or whatever. So they get used to the thing. So that by the time they go out into the real streets, they're comfortable. I like to call this the 99% there problem, right? It looked like there was a giant problem, but actually the thing was 99% there. There was just 1% that needed to be filled. And that was understanding exactly what is happening with your consumer, with your end consumer, as you were just saying, and making sure that you're doing everything possible to bridge what you do to what they need. And you got to do that on a granular level and understand exactly what people need and exactly what kind of problems you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spot on. So you have a new book coming out. What's it about, and where can people go to get it?
So thanks. So it's called Build for Tomorrow, and it is basically exactly what we've been talking about here. It is a guide to adaptability. And what I do is I break down change, the experience of change, into 4 phases: panic, adaptation, new normal, wouldn't go back. And what I want to do is help people move through these stages. My argument is that everybody, doesn't matter how successful you are, everybody goes through change within these 4 phases. The difference is that some people move through them a lot faster and more efficiently than others. So I want to help through lessons of really successful companies and entrepreneurs, but also the lessons from history, as you've heard, because the reason I like history is because the full story is told, right? Now you can debate what's happening in the construction industry. You can say, well, in 10 years, this might happen or that might happen. Rewind far enough back and you can see the full story start to finish. You can see exactly what happened. And I just find that really instructive, because it means that you can take lessons from what truly did work and what truly did happen and start to apply them to the story that you're writing today. So anyway, I tell stories from history. I tell stories from the smartest entrepreneurs, and I tell some stories from science. And ultimately what I want to do is help people get through change so that they can reach a moment where they say, I have something so new and valuable that I wouldn't want to go back to a time before I had it, which is their wouldn't go back moment. So anyway, the book is called Build for Tomorrow, and You can find it wherever you find books.
Awesome. Well, Jason, final question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation means not being satisfied with what there already is. There's a great Harvard Business Review piece that asked, why do big companies stop innovating? And the answer that it offers is because after a company's early innovations and they find something that works in the marketplace, they start to shift, and they start to shift their resources and their attention and their efforts away from innovation and towards efficiency. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with efficiency, but here's what happens if you build an entire organization where everybody's incentivized top to bottom to make something better, faster, and cheaper that they're already doing. What happens is that you don't keep yourself alert at all to other changes in your industry, such that you don't see and you don't know how to react to big disruptive ideas that are ultimately going to put you out of business. And so what I want to do and what I want to see from everybody is a good mixture. We should be doing things efficiently. You should know how you work and how you bring value to people, and you should try to figure out how to do that in the most efficient way possible. But you better leave that door open to identify new ideas and feel like, there will come a time, not in one burst, but rather there will come a time, and it will be a slow series of steps that you're going to have to be very alert to and responsive to, where the thing that you're doing cannot simply be the only thing that you do, that you're going to have to change and you have to evolve. And that, to me, is what innovation is.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Hey,
really appreciate it. The conversation.
Thank you.
Look forward to the book.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.